Nebraska's clearly thrown a lot of time and a lot of effort into their top prospects for the class of 2026. Now, I know this video, we're going to be talking about the defensive line in particular, but a little recruiting kind of grand scheme before we do the breakdown of the defensive line recruits Nebraska is after. A few weeks ago, I told you to be patient, that June is a big month for Nebraska. There's 3 big recruiting weekends in which Nebraska has locked in over 25 confirmed official visitors for the month of June. Now, a couple of weeks ago, when I told you this, things were looking pretty good. And as I always say, recruiting is fluid. Camden Jensen commits out of nowhere to UCLA. Luke Sorensen appears to be headed to Penn State. Don't even think he comes for his official visit. If he does, awesome. Gives us a chance. Lincoln Watkins is scheduled to officially visit Florida before Nebraska. And if Nebraska misses out on both of them after missing out on Camden Jensen, they could go 0 for 4 on their top prospects at tight end. That is concerning for me. Now, Lincoln Watkins, I think it's going to be a battle between Florida and Nebraska. We're in a good spot. Just a quick update on the tight end position. Now, some position groups are doing very good. Wide receiver, I'm feeling good about. Offensive line, I'm feeling good about. Tight end, I'm not. The other positions, the one we're talking about today, defensive line. Not feeling too great right now with the defensive line. And I think there's really 2 reasons when I look at this as to what issues Nebraska is having with recruiting, not just defensive line, but other position groups as well. When you lost Terrence Knighton and you lost Tony White to Florida State, you promoted John Butler to defensive coordinator, you brought in Addison Williams to coach DBs, and you brought in Coach Terry Braden to coach the defensive line. When Coach Braden arrived, it was after the Chiefs won or lost the Super Bowl. It was in February. He missed out on key recruiting time in January and the first half of February because of the NFL. That's no fault of his. It's no fault of anybody's. It's just the Chiefs didn't want to let him go before the Super Bowl was over. 100% understand that. So in the short term, losing White and losing Knighton is hurting Nebraska. In the long run, Nebraska will be perfectly fine. However, reason number 2 is when these new coaches were brought in, Nebraska almost completely reset their entire recruiting board. There are some guys like Titan Davis that stayed on. Jace Reynolds, for example, they kept recruiting him. But for the most part, there was a lot of new faces to this recruiting board. And when you're recruiting these big-time top prospects, a lot of their recruiting starts their sophomore years, or it starts in their junior year. And so when you're going up against the Floridas, the Notre Dames, the Georgia, Alabama, etc., those schools have been recruiting the same player you're going after for at least a year, if not longer, and you didn't start recruiting them until January. Most of the guys we're going to talk about today, Nebraska didn't start recruiting until January. So they're immediately behind the 8 ball. And I have to, this does concern me, but I have to give credit to the coaching staff. In short order, they have quickly risen up the board of these top recruits, not just on the defensive side of the ball, but on the offensive side of the ball as well. They put in the work to be in position to land a ton of top prospects. However, again, relationships is important. So is NIL, obviously. And Nebraska has done a good job establishing relationships quickly. They just don't have the longevity in the recruitment as some of these other schools. The defensive line room is a concern, both currently and going forward. We've talked about this many times, Justin and I. They have a solid class of 2025. It's a young room overall. However, the defensive line class in 2026, as things sit right now, there is 100% validity in being concerned with where that room is. The 2 reasons I just stated, right? Nebraska only pursued a handful of defensive linemen, 6 to 8 total defensive linemen that they pursued. Nebraska will bring in more offensive line official visitors in June, July, or I'm sorry, in the 3 weeks in June, than they brought in the previous 5 months on the defensive line for visits. They only have 2 confirmed official visits on the defensive line, probably very likely getting a third. There's a handful of top shelf recruits. They shot their shot and they just missed, and they were quickly eliminated from consideration. Guys like 4-star defensive end Luke Waffle, 4-star DN edge Mikhail Blade, 3-star Max Meyer, who they didn't recruit heavily, and then 4-star defensive tackle Taj Overton. Terry Braden has his work cut out for him. Now, I imagine his recruiting pitch, because I think he does a very good job connecting with players and connecting with parents of recruits. But I imagine it's leveraging that NFL experience. Hey, I coached in the NFL for 10 years. I coached in multiple Super Bowls. I won multiple Super Bowls. I coached the likes of Chris Jones, one of the best defensive tackles in the NFL. George Karlaftis, a very fast rising edge rusher in the NFL. Malik Herring. Charles Omenihu. He's got a good track record of really good defensive line and good defensive line production in the NFL. Now, his top prospects that he's chasing right now is a guy that Nebraska has been recruiting for over a year. This guy was loved by both sides of the staff, or both staffs, Tony White and now John Butler's staff. I'm talking about Titan Davis, 6'4", 250 to 260 pounds, a true hand in the dirt defensive end. Junior season, he had 46 tackles, 18 tackles for loss, and 9 sacks. In fact, he lined up against Jackson Cantwell in the state title game, in which they beat Jackson Cantwell's team by a score of 35-20. They boat raced him. Now, Titan did visit Nebraska for the Elite Junior Day in February. I don't believe he made it in for a spring visit, but he may have. And then Coach Braden went and visited him a couple weeks ago. His top group right now is Alabama, Nebraska, and Michigan. And it's probably in that order, maybe Michigan over Nebraska right now. But I do think Alabama is the favorite. He's visiting them next week. Then he's visiting Nebraska on June 13th. And then he's visiting Michigan on June 20th. Could he line up more visits afterwards? Sure. Do those other schools have a better chance to get his commitment than the 3 I just mentioned? Probably not. Nebraska wasn't home, like I just said. And that should help make a little bit of a move going into his official visit to Alabama. And then Nebraska can make an even bigger move when he comes in on June 13th. There is a lot of ground to make up with Titan Davis. Our other top prospect, Cameron Wilson. This is a guy Nebraska didn't start recruiting heavily until January. So again, a lot of ground to make up. What'd they do? They made up a lot of ground. Nebraska's staff, while yes, late to the party on some of these recruits, is excellent at building relationships quickly, building trust, etc. Cameron Wilson is a composite 4-star, maybe, no, 3-star. Sorry. He will be a composite 4-star by the time everything's said and done. Just look at his junior stats, for God's sake. 118 tackles, 32 tackles for loss, 17 sacks, and 4 forced fumbles. Phenomenal junior campaign. He'll only get better next season. And the big thing here, too, with him, Nebraska's recruiting his teammate Ryan Moret. We'll get to that here in just a second. Now, Cameron's more of a true edge, stand-up edge, or even a jack linebacker prospect in Nebraska's system. He's currently committed to Syracuse. However, I don't think that commitment's going to stick. I've said that time and time again. When everything's said and done, this is going to be a battle between Tony White and John Butler. Terrence Knighton, Terry Braden. That's going to be the battle. And Phil Simpson, too, will be involved, too, because he recruits Florida very heavily. Former Nebraska coaches versus their replacements. Who is going to win out for Cameron Wilson? I like our chances here. This is the one prospect on our list that I really like our chances. He was the one that went on record saying Flo Braska is real. That there is such a home feeling at Nebraska, despite being so far away from home. His official visit to Nebraska is on June 6th. Goes to Syracuse the week after on June 13th and wraps things up with Florida State on June 20th. That is a little concerning for me, just to be honest, that they kind of get that final say. Now, Nebraska is going to take this all the way to the wire. Another top prospect that Nebraska didn't start recruiting heavily until January was Valdon Sohn. Big defensive tackle, true defensive tackle, 6'4", 315 pounds. Reclassified from the class of 27 to the class of 2026. Moved over from Sweden, plays high school football in Virginia. E.J. Barthel was out there last week. Last Friday, E.J. Barthel was in home with Valdon Sohn. And at the same time, Terry Braden was in Sweden in home with Valdon's family. No other coaching staff has gone overseas to see his family. You saw a very similar approach to class of 2025 signee. What was his name? Brian Tapu from New Zealand. Except they flew his family from New Zealand to Nebraska, and then they flew him from Utah to Nebraska for his official visit. Nebraska goes above and beyond the expectation consistently in recruiting. Now, Valdon is a little bit newer to football. Obviously, he moved here from Sweden. He's played one full year of high school football in America. He grew up playing soccer like Ndamukong Suh. He played taekwondo. He did jiu-jitsu. Now, I'm not saying he's going to be the next Ndamukong Suh. That may never happen. But I'll tell you that Nebraska's sales pitch to him is being a dominant, disruptive defensive tackle like Ndamukong Suh. When he came in for his unofficial visit in February, they had him up in I think it was the west, no, it was east skyboxes overlooking the stadium. And then I think it was E.J. Barthel that was the one chanting his name and selling him on the "you can be just like Sue." He did announce a top 8, consists of Nebraska, USC, Auburn, South Carolina, Texas, Florida, Georgia, and Oklahoma. Here's the thing with Valdon. He's only locked in 2 official visits, Florida and Oklahoma. He hasn't locked in one with Nebraska yet. Now, that could change. I think it will change. I think Florida and Oklahoma have an edge over Nebraska right now, though. And so if it continues down that path, Nebraska, may lose out on their top defensive tackle prospect and, like we just talked about, Titan Davis, their top defensive end prospect. And they've only brought in or scheduled, I think, actually 4 official visits with defensive linemen. Yeah, 4 official visits. I like reading tea leaves, like on social media. Valdon only posted about Oklahoma and Florida when they came to visit him. It is telling, despite how stupid social media can be, it is a tea leaf that you can read into a little bit. He only posted about those 2 when they came to visit him. Not when Nebraska went and visited his family. His coach or whoever retweeted or posted something, and he may have retweeted it, I believe, but he directly posted about Florida. He directly posted about Oklahoma, and it's little things like that you can kind of start to pick up on. Nebraska's been in home twice in May. We just talked about the one last week. They were in home a couple weeks prior to that. This is recruitment that's going to be going the distance, though, I think. Even if he makes an early decision, let's say August 1st, he commits to Florida. Nebraska's not going to stop recruiting him. That goes for Titan Davis. That goes for Cameron Wilson. They're not going to stop recruiting these guys because they commit somewhere else. There's a couple more prospects, too. So let's say Nebraska misses out. So, because right now, I think they're probably not the favorite for any of these guys we just talked about. Maybe Cameron Wilson right now, possibly. But they absolutely need to be prepared to potentially miss out on all 3 of these prospects and what their next step is. So one to watch is 4-star edge, Xavion Griffin. Let me pull up his profile. Xavion Griffin Hayes, a composite 4-star defensive end slash edge, 6'6", 230 to 240 pounds. Nebraska offered him in January. Terry Braden just went out for a visit. We made his top 4 over Texas, over Notre Dame, over Georgia, despite never having visited Nebraska. His top 4 consists of Clemson, Michigan, Florida State, and Nebraska. All of them are getting official visits. He has locked in an official visit on June 13th. That was news that broke earlier today, I believe, or yesterday. Nebraska has a lot of ground to make up here, so don't get your hopes up. But this is a guy they're certainly going to be pushing for, regardless if they miss out on the guys we just talked about. This guy is a complete disruptor off the edge. And then in the event they miss out on Valdon Sohn, which, again, reading tea leaves, you see the coaches engaging with another defensive tackle. That may indicate where they think they sit with Valdon. And in this case, we're talking about composite 4-star Anthony Kennedy, decommitted from Missouri. His weight on 3 is not wrong or not right, which, doesn't surprise me because they're not that good. 6'6". Even his height's wrong. It says what, 6'3.5" there. He's 6'6", 335 pounds. He's an absolute mountain of a man. Now, Nebraska is certainly gauging interest, but SEC is pushing hard. Georgia and Arkansas really want him. He's from Arkansas. They're going to try and keep him home. Wherever any of these guys commit to, though, Nebraska is going to recruit them till the end. Now, just to kind of recap, and then we will get out of here. Nebraska resetting their board was a gigantic risk. Outside of Titan Davis, Nebraska started making their push in recruiting pretty much every player we talked about in December/January, where most schools were recruiting them for at least a year. Kudos to the coaches for getting in with these prospects. However, it is so late in the process for a lot of big-time defensive linemen. Anytime you have a big, physical, athletic defensive lineman, they're going to get tons of NIL, tons of pressure from other schools to commit. Nebraska has to be able to open the checkbook here for defensive linemen. Desperate teams set the market. And right now, Nebraska could be getting desperate.